Howdy. To start, thanks so much for having me. This is a presentation about full site editing. I'm very excited to talk with you. This is a feature I've been thinking a lot about over the last year, and I'm excited to share with you all. And I'm also really keen to learn from each of you what you're worried about, what you're excited about, how you think full siting can improve your workflows, and more. So this is pre-recorded because I wanted to make sure, with so much information going around, wanted to make sure I had all the details lined up. And so I could pause and rework certain sections, but please know that I welcome questions. So while you can't interrupt me during the presentation, there will be a whole section at the end. Pull out your pen and paper, write them down, and know that they're very, very welcomed. But for now, let's dig in. So briefly about me, I'm actually originally from Winter Park, Florida, so I haven't been home in about a year and a half. And thank you for letting me virtually return home by participating in this meetup. In 2011, I first found WordPress as a student at UNC Chapel Hill. I worked on their multi-site, had a great time. 2013, went to my first ever WordCamp. 2014, I joined Automatic as a happiness engineer, focused on WordPress, and had a great time focusing on security of websites. And it gave me a really interesting look into concerns people have about websites that most people don't think about. And then 2020, I switched into the developer relations position at Automatic and have been there ever since. So let's get meta and talk about the talk. So to start, I'm going to zoom out really big and then slowly put pieces together until we kind of get a nice map of what full siting is and with all the details. So this will look kind of like first answering some big high level questions, digging into then how the work is actually being done. So going from like high level, what is this? Why does it help me, to how is this work actually being approached? What are the pieces of the work that I need to know? The role of the outreach program. And then I want to address some key topics and questions that I often get asked when I've presented at other places and talked on other podcasts about full siting or just one-on-one with people. I love to talk about full siting. So hopefully some of the key topics and questions can help get people thinking about other things they want to ask about. So let's dig into the first big picture question. Why is this being done at all? Simply put, it's to empower users. Rather than having a specific part of the site locked away in a theme or requiring a plugin, full siting will basically open it up to customize any part of your site the way you want to. Or on the flip side, you can let it be, or if you're an agency, you could lock certain sites down or certain parts of a site down, depending upon how you want users to have access. So it's a pretty powerful, big mission to actually deliver on full site editing. So I answered, why is this being done? Now let's dig into how does this fit into the WordPress roadmap. So full siting is a major part of phase 2 of the current roadmap. It's not the only part though. There's actually other interrelated projects, including things like block patterns, the block directory, block-based themes. So it's just one piece of this larger roadmap, but it's one of the major grounding points of phase 2 of the roadmap. So what is full siting at a high level? Essentially, it's a collection of features, and it's important that you get the collection part. But it's a collection of features that bring the familiar experience of blocks to all parts of your site rather than just posts and pages. But Anne, what does a collection of features mean? Basically, I've noticed people tend to refer to full siting as one big thing. It's like an on-off switch. It's this monolith. And it's actually not. It's not this binary thing. It's actually way more, it's way better to talk about how there's different pieces that fit together and interrelate. Because it actually gives flexibility for release squads to release what's ready rather than all of it at once. So while it might be easier to talk about how it's this one big thing, I encourage you all to kind of think about the different pieces if you can. And I'll touch on this more in a bit. Okay, so what does full siting actually allow me to do, right? So cool, Anne, you collection of features, but like, show me the money. So this is an example of a 404 page. So a 404 page, typically you're not actually able to edit. But with full siting, you could actually create this 404 page. And this was actually done by one of the Automatic designers, Channing. Shout out to Channing. She did this as part of one of the tests for full siting, the outreach program. So it's a pretty beautiful thing. While we all might not have the design chops that Channing does, it is pretty neat to see kind of a very tangible hands-on example of what full siting unlocks you to be able to do. To get more specific, basically, if you're a user, imagine editing the template that a specific post has for a specific category. For theme authors, you'll be able to tap into design tools that'll allow you to focus more on actually creating a really compelling experience and less on getting the code in place and hacking things up. And you can also opt in and out of whatever you're ready for, which is really exciting. But ideally for theme authors, this is going to be a huge change. It'll allow creating themes to be much, much easier. If you're an agency, you'll have greater control over what you can offer clients, including setting custom brand colors with presets, to locking down various aspects for consistency, such as typography or wanting only certain default colors to be used. So how is this work being done? So rather than trying to go through everything in one go, this project has actually been broken down into 7 different milestones. And some of these milestones are completely separate, their own thing. Some are very interrelated, some mix and match in different ways. But we're going to go through each of them so you can get a sense of how this is being done. I'm going to try to stay at a high level and before going into a very brief demo midway through the presentation, but hopefully this will give you a sense of what this looks like. So milestone 1, this is actually such a big milestone that it was broken into 2 parts. And essentially this is all about laying the foundation. Everything from multi-entity saving, which is actually being displayed here in the GIF that you see, where you can actually update multiple things at once, including like a template part, like you update your header, you update a post, and you update your footer. It'll show all the changes happening and allow you to check and uncheck different boxes to save. Basically, just think about this as building the foundation of the experience, the technical foundation, unlocking things like being able to edit a template directly, to working on specific blocks for full siting, like the site title. So we have a site title block and it updates everywhere you have it listed. Milestone 2, browsing. Again, there's another little visual so you can see what this actually looks like. This is basically giving you a map and a GPS to know your location, how to get where you need to go for your site. So because there are these new parts of editing your site that are unlocked with full siting, like template editing and template parts like a header or footer, there needs to be a way to navigate between them. So this milestone is dedicated to that. How can we make it as easy as possible for you to get where you need to go? Milestone 3, styling. So this actually covers a couple different layers. I'm going to break it down in this slide and then the next one to help give you a sense visually of what this looks like. But this includes everything from the technical requirements to make various levels work and the UI for users. So you can actually see a depiction of the future design for the UI that users would interact with in the image right here. So there's generally 3 layers, including styling for local blocks, theme defaults, and then global modifications, or what we often call global styles. You can think of global styles as basically having the option to edit all aspects of your site. So if you want to set a typography that goes across your entire site, if you want to have certain colors for all H1 headers, you can set that up with global styles. Currently, much of the work has been focused on the technical underpinnings, especially around aspects like theme JSON, which is a very key component for block themes and a really big tool for block theme authors. But for 5.8, the focus is generally going to be on merging the non-user interface parts of global styles. So don't expect to interact with this system unless you're a theme author. If you are a theme author, get really excited. And here's a little visual just so you can get a sense of it. So these are the different layers that have to interact in the styling system and the hierarchy that needs to be thought of when working on this milestone. Milestone 4, theme blocks. So because full siting opens up so many more aspects of the site to edit, new blocks had to be created basically. So if you're creating a new template for a specific category and you're putting in post content, and you want to add the post author block, which you can see here, you can quickly add it in, customize it to your liking, add in post comment, add in post date, or remove the post date. You can edit each parts of these things. What's pretty exciting about this is that there's actually 20+ blocks that fall into this category. And if all goes as planned, some of those will be released for 5.8 and available potentially for all sites. So even if you're not using a block theme, you could have access to these theme blocks, which is pretty powerful and pretty cool. Query block. So the query block has its own milestone because it's a pretty powerful block. It's ultimately meant to be a theme author tool. So in the long run, if you're a user, imagine that you'll interact with what we call block variations, which basically are just like different variations of a block, as the name implies. But imagine you want to add in your latest post. You'll add the latest post block, but underneath it, what will be powering that experience of adding your latest post will be the query block. And essentially, as the name implies, it allows you to query posts and pages and display them in different arrangements on the page. I'm very excited, actually, in Gutenberg 10.5, which will be released in just about 2 weeks. There's going to be some new patterns. You can see right here, large, medium, small are the current selection of patterns that you have for the query block, but pretty soon there's going to be like a grid pattern and a couple other cool ones, which is pretty exciting. Generally speaking, though, if you're an end user, don't expect to interact with this. If you're a theme author, get excited. Navigation block. Again, this is just a single block, but don't be fooled. It's definitely a mighty one. So this milestone is dedicated to all things navigation block, both in terms of structure and design. And you can see in this little GIF I have going on, I'm just kind of making little design changes and moving things around so you can get a sense of what it's like to interact with this block. And it actually includes, this milestone actually includes everything from how do you build a really simple menu with a few items to thinking about how to create a really large mega menu and add in new blocks like the search block that you can see here, or even adding submenus, different designs, different layouts, and more. So the last piece of the milestones is the gradual adoption. And I hope this gift makes you laugh, but also seriously, this is like the intent is like, we slowly want people to be able to adapt in the way that they can. And once more of these pieces are completed, there's basically a ton of room to start exploring how adoption might look like for those who can't or don't want to restructure a full theme. So this might be an intermix of block-based themes and regular PHP templates, or it might be covered by projects like the block-based widget editor and the navigation screen. Both those projects I'll cover later, but for now, just keep in mind that this is intentionally a milestone. We want to allow for gradual adoption and want people to have lots of pathways in to taking advantage of full site editing. So what's coming to WordPress 5.8? So just last week, a post went out from Josefa, who is the executive director of the WordPress project. And I want to read a quote from it just to kind of set the tone and give you a sense. So full siting is a collection of projects, and together they represent a big change, arguably too much for a single release. The most important context to share is that it isn't shipping as the full default experience for users. One of the clearest pieces of feedback from phase 1 merge process was that there wasn't enough time for our extenders, agencies, theme authors, plugin developers, site builders, etc., to prepare for the upcoming changes. With that in mind, this merge process won't be an on-off switch. And you can see I've bolded very specific parts that I hope you take home with you. All right, so let's talk WordPress 5.8 plans. This is up-to-date information as of today. A post was released from Josefa on Make Core if you'd like to check it out. And from the call that the project leadership had, this is what they came up with for the 5.8 plans. This includes improvements from Gutenberg 9.9 and beyond. So we always package different versions of Gutenberg into major releases. This release is no different. There'll be an introduction of new blocks, including query, site logo, navigation, etc. These are each very powerful blocks, very exciting to see. Theme JSON mechanism, this is part of what allows block themes to use different global styling, which will be very cool for block authors to get their hands on. The template editor for pages and a blank template. I'll actually be showing a demo of this in a moment, so hang tight there, but it'll all make sense in a bit. The widget screen and block widgets in the customizer. This is basically work being done to bring blocks to the widgets experience. I will talk more about that later, about how it's a stepping stone towards full site editing. And then finally, design tools. So even more design tools that people can hook into, including duotone, which adds a really cool color filter, layout controls, padding, and more. So at this point, let's pause for a minute and actually show off one of the features that is aimed to be included in 5.8. I'm going to show you template editing, the navigation block, and just some of the cool flows with multi-entity saving and some of the things that we talked about that will make it into this release. So I'm in the post editor. I have a new post. I love to blog and write and present. I hit update, super happy, whatever. Open up the post settings, and there's this new section that allows you to both create a brand new template, and this will ideally be used both in themes that are block-based themes, so they're ready for full siting, and potentially for classic themes. There's actually work underway so that this will be available in any theme being used on WordPress right now. So right now, if I hit edit, this will take me into the template that this post is using. So let's do that now. So as you can see, this drops me in to what looks like the entire site. So you can see I have my header up here, I have the footer down here, and I can make changes directly to them. So for example, if I jump in here, this is the navigation block, and I haven't yet set it up. So I can say add all pages, and I can start empty. In this case, I'll say, you know what, let's start empty. And let's say I want to add a custom link. And one of the cool things you can actually do, you can quickly select from here, or let's say I want to add a new post. Oh, let me first select post link. So adventures around the world. Let's pretend I'm just inspired while I'm writing this. I can actually create a draft post, which is pretty cool. And it'll show up here. It will not show up on the front end since it's a draft, but it actually creates a page draft for this with this title automatically. So let's say, I'm scrolling through here, I'm going, oh, this looks pretty good. Actually, I kind of want to see what it looks like if I add an image to the post here. Pull up an image block, open my media library. Hammocks. Can't get enough of hammocks. Gonna throw that in there. Great. So at this point, I've made changes to the actual header. I've made changes to the post. I'm just gonna apply and see what happens. So this is the multi-entity saving that I mentioned earlier. Now, as you can see, it has a section for posts. So it's saying, hey, you edited this post. And it has a section saying, hey, you edited the header. So at this point, I'm going to hit save because I want both those changes to propagate. And now I'm back into my post, into the writing flow, and I can easily switch back and forth. I can also select a new one. But yeah, hopefully this gives you a good sense of one of the key parts that's being worked on for inclusion in 5.8. There will be a demo later, but this is just a taste. To help set the stage for what you can prepare for, here are some upcoming dates to keep in mind. If you're like me, time is moving really strangely. So I like to have dates to kind of anchor me. Feel free to take a screenshot of this or write it down if you'd like. So April 13th and April 27th, these are the go and no-go decision dates. So right now, project leadership actually has gathered. So you might notice if you are good with dates and good with time right now, April 13th has come and gone. So this date has passed and project leadership has met actually to go through different FSE related features and projects to figure out what might be ready for 5.8. I would expect to see more high-level posts throughout the month, especially after the second date, the April 27th date, that's when final decisions will be made around 5.8. Then if all goes well, the beta period for WordPress 5.8 will start on June 8th. So people can actually start getting their hands on the tools that are going to be in place in the actual release and testing it and finding bugs and improving things from there. And July 20th is the actual date of WordPress 5.8 and when it's released. This is being considered as an open beta where theme authors, plugin authors, agencies, and more can dig into the tools that are being offered and that I went over previously. And then in December 2021, that's around the time when WordPress 5.9 will be released. And this is when I expect to move from tools for extenders into tools actually for users and more user-facing interactions with full site editing and having things unlocked in the interface that previously in 5.8 most users won't notice and won't interact with. In 5.9, I expect that to be more visible. So some key takeaways. I know this is a lot of information. So only what's ready from the various milestones will be shipped. This is not an on-off switch and it won't take over your site. The focus right now is on giving tools to extenders first before user-facing changes. And that's a big lesson that was learned from the 5.0 merge where Gutenberg and the core editor was brought into the WordPress experience. And this is something that thankfully we're in a position where because of these interrelated projects, we're able to move in a more flexible and adaptable way to release what's ready and not anything else. All right, at this point, let's jump into the full siting outreach program. As a reminder, this is the program that I actually run. So consider this free reign to ask me whatever question you'd like, because I think probably too much about this program, but it's something I'm really excited to talk to you about. And I think it's a really neat vehicle for both feedback and education about full site editing. So let's go over some big picture questions, kind of like we did earlier on, and just get the details out of the way. So let's start. What is it? So essentially, it's just a program focused on full site editing. It's in the form of a Slack channel right now. I'll go over how to join it in a bit. But it has curated calls for testing, summary posts of the feedback that we get, and various educational opportunities that you can hop in on, mainly in the form of live streams. I'm running some hallway hangouts, which are basically just Zoom calls. People can come in and we can talk about full site editing. What's the goal? So the goal is pretty simple. Help improve full site editing experience by gathering feedback from WordPress site builders. While the group originally started solely to be about feedback, there's actually this really neat educational component that has come up as the feature has developed and as more people have gotten curious about it. So people can join just to build their own awareness about what's happening with full site editing and kind of just look at a glance or just help amplify the posts that are coming through. Why was it started? So I'm going to quote Josefa from the kickoff post. During the WordPress 5.0 retrospective, which is when Gutenberg was merged and the core editor was merged, one of the things that came up routinely was the need for better engagement with users. It was generally agreed from all levels and area of contribution that users would be most impacted by Gutenberg, but the users were also the group we had the least channels of communication to. To help get user feedback to WordPress developers a little bit more seamlessly, I'm going to try an experimental outreach program. So basically, this is a lesson that was learned from the 5.0 release. And in order to prevent another situation where people are caught by surprise, this program is in place to help people get excited and on-ramped and onboarded onto full site editing, as well as getting feedback so that we know if a major workflow change is coming into play, we can actually get user feedback to make it a little bit easier. All right, at this point, I bet you're just so stoked, you're ready to dive in. Awesome. All you got to do is join FSC Outreach Experiment and make WordPress Slack, and then you're all set. You'll just get a bunch of annoying pings from me with prompts for how to test, interesting posts related to full site editing, and more. I promise it's also not as scary as this dive, which looks absolutely terrifying, but also beautiful. So because we've done, at this point, we're on our 5th call for testing, I want to go over some high-level pieces of feedback that we've actually gotten about the experience so far. And basically across all the calls for testing, these are repeated themes that have come up, but keep in mind that because there are certain aspects that we actually haven't tested, so global styles, for example, the UI isn't available really for users and it's not refined for users. So it's not something that we've had as a focus part of testing, even though there is a UI that is available. So certain things are left out purely because they aren't necessarily ready for testing, but these are the top pieces of feedback, so bear with me. Previewing content. Publish a post, you want to go preview it, or you're editing a post, you want to go preview the content. The same thing is true with full site editing. This is a big thing that kept coming up. And my question is this a necessary workflow? Or is it a symptom of other problems? Because in general, it should be, the site editor should be as WYSIWYG as what you see as what you get as possible. So if you're making a change, it should look exactly the same as the front end of your site. And because it doesn't right now, it's causing this tension. There actually is a preview site option under discussion, as well as a browse mode option, which basically would turn off, if you're actually editing your site, it would turn off everything that wouldn't actually show up on the front end. So if you only have one page of posts, but you have pagination set up, so if you had multiple pages, that would actually go away. So as you can imagine, this is currently for discussion, but there actually are a couple different pathways to try and address this problem, but it's a very important one to address. Saving process. I like to say it's technically reliable, but not yet delightful. So basically, it's left a lot to be desired right now, and it's resulted in a fair bit of confusion. There's a lot of feature requests and enhancements and bugs that have come up related to saving. And this is likely because the multi-entity saving aspect that I demoed earlier is very new for WordPress users. It's not something we're used to having as part of our workflow. So it's something that inherently needs some work on. So whether it was, people requesting more granular saving options to show specifically what was being changed, to issues with saving for screen readers, to confusion around even just what the general parts mean, like what you're actually selecting or unselecting, this was definitely a big, big area of feedback. Distinction between editing areas. So basically, because you can edit all parts of your site, it's hard to know, like, am I editing the header for all of my site, or am I editing just a specific piece of content on a post? And this kind of distinction, jumping between different levels of like, oh, you're changing this will change everything, to you're just changing this one thing in this one spot, is pretty tricky. And right now there's not a lot of friction, and there's not a lot of clarity in the actual experience to show when you're actually jumping between those different levels. So this was a big piece that's come up, and it's something that is an active area of iteration and exploration to kind of get the right amount of friction in place. So rethinking with an alignment. Previously, alignment and full siting worked to optimize how traditional themes worked, where they basically traditional themes provide their own alignment styles. And this worked okay for the project up until this point. But recently, work has been shipped to reimagine how this dynamic should work to allow for actually more control over alignments and width when using the site editor. And this should actually help make sure that whether you want something that's full width or you want to change the actual width of your content that's showing up, that it'll actually be what you see is what you get. And right now, this is another piece of feedback at a high level that's impacted that what you see is what you get experience. General usability improvements. I admit this is totally a catch-all, and it covers a ton of stuff, but it's actually a very important one to think of because it'll actually move the site editing experience from being just functional to actually delightful, which is really exciting. And there's a ton of issues that are included in this, including some enhancement requests, bug reports, all that good stuff. One of my favorites to talk about is creating a background image on a template part. So imagine you have a header, you're working on it, you're super excited, and you're almost done. And then you're like, oh, do you know what would be really cool is if I had like mountains in the background? Maybe I'll add like a cover block in the background and add an image and set the opacity pretty low, but have mountains going in the background of this site. That's really hard to do. You basically would have to delete everything and add the block in and then add everything back. So those are the kinds of experiences that we're trying to improve right now. Improving placeholders. So placeholders, especially for some of the newer blocks, are a powerful way to both guide people and a current point of confusion. So you probably saw this with the navigation block earlier where it had those little gray boxes. It's like, how do we explain to people, hey, this is something you have to set up and engage with, but here's generally what it will look like and what it will do. And the feedback for this mainly came into play with the query block, social icon block, featured image block, and the navigation block. Each currently actually also get users started in different ways. So not only are there different placeholders for different experiences, the actual experience of interacting with the placeholders are all pretty inconsistent right now. So I think in the long run, it seems that users will benefit a bunch from a standardized, consistent way to interact with placeholder content so that it becomes a really familiar interaction when you're working with a more powerful block. And this especially is true for the query block and navigation block. Okay, now that we've covered the milestones, the outreach program, high-level pieces of feedback, I'm going to quickly run through some key topics that I imagine you're going to have questions about. And just because I cover them here does not mean I don't want to answer questions. So please don't see this as a sign that you can also still ask questions about these topics. This is just what I've been hearing from folks. Will full siting take over my site? Hopefully by this point you all can say no in a resounding way. But no, this is not something that's going to all of a sudden on-off switch, you upgrade to 5.8, it takes everything over. Not at all. You very much have to opt into it through using a theme, a block theme that supports actually these features. And in time, more pathways are going to be built as well, so that when you're actually using full siting, you'll likely be using pieces in all of it. So you could just be using the query block, or you could just be using global styles without it taking over your entire site. What about the block-based navigation and widget screens? Like, what's the deal there? So in case you missed it, there's actually 2 additional projects that are dedicated to bringing blocks to more areas of the site outside of full site editing. And this include the navigation screens, you can build out menus, and the widget screens, so you can build out your widget sections. And this is pretty powerful and high impact work, and they're both separate projects that are tangential to full siting, but you can think of them as stepping stones, basically. So you could have a theme that is a classic theme, but it uses a block-based widget screen so that people can have the power of blocks with their widgets. And essentially the whole point, like I said, it's a stepping stone to get people used to using blocks in more places. Site builders. This is, I could write a thesis about this because there's so much to talk about here. I imagine I'm going to get questions about this. But essentially full siting is being built partially so people don't get stuck or locked into one site builder or another. It's also being built in a way that site builders can actually hook into what's being created if they choose to. I've heard from a lot of folks though that they expect full siting to actually fully replicate their favorite site builders functionality. And I'm here to say that while the goals between full siting and site builders are pretty similar in terms of empowering users and giving better tools to customize a site, the difference is that we're building for 40% of the internet. And we're building even for site builders, where site builders have a much more targeted approach. And in the future, I do think there will always be room for specific takes of how to have an ideal site editing experience, whether that's like geared to a specific group, like a marketing style approach, or if you want to have things locked down, or if you want to have things opened up. But generally speaking, full siting is meant to actually expand the way WordPress as a whole uses blocks. So don't expect it to fully replicate any sort of site builder, your favorite site builder, essentially. How is this going to impact themes? So in the long run, this should actually make theme development much easier. And I think Marcus's demonstration later will show that. And much simpler, especially with the design tools that will be essentially ready at your fingertips to tap into. And ideally, because of what's being released, it should allow theme authors to focus less on coding and functions and more on design aesthetics, integrating block patterns and all that good stuff. But because one of the key things I wanted to really drive home in this section, though, is that because full siting requires a block-based theme or a theme with certain functionality enabled, this makes theming extremely important to get right. So I've heard people say like, oh, themes are a thing of the past. It's very much not true. I'd actually argue the opposite. The theme is almost key to this experience, to having it be delightful and having it make sense. What pathways are going to be created? I know I've talked a lot about pathways this entire time, but it is the entire focus of the final milestone for full siting. So expect a lot of pathways. For now, this includes everything from having a classic theme that can take advantage of global styles to template editing or a block-based widget screen. This also includes things like allowing certain full site editing related blocks to be available for users, regardless of if they're using a classic theme or a block theme, or enabling the ability to edit block templates directly, kind of like I showed in the demo earlier. So there's going to be a ton of options here, and I'm actually really excited to see what happens once 5.8 kind of sparks the creativity of the community, because I imagine both that people will create their own pathways and start experimenting, and we'll also get a very clear sense of, hey, I actually really need X, Y, and Z pathway, and we'll get a sense of demand from the community of core, which is super exciting to have. What's the best way to prepare? So this depends on who you are. So depending on who you are at a high level, this is what I recommend. Join the FSC Outreach Program. I know this is the thing that I run. I'm very biased, but seriously, join it. I think it's really, really helpful to get a sense both of feedback, what's being currently iterated on, and just general education opportunities. If you're a theme author, I really recommend checking out the theme experiments repo and joining the block-based theme meetings to learn about the latest and greatest, because lots of good information is shared there. In general, too, it's often also helpful to join the weekly core editor meetings because there's regular updates about the projects and PRs people are working on. And finally, pay attention to upcoming content on Learn WordPress, because I think there's gonna be a ton of stuff coming up about full siting depending upon what's scoped for 5.8 and 5.9, including building a block-based theme, for example, that will really help, I think, everyone level up. All right, so we're at the very end. And at this point, if you want to stay connected with me or you have follow-up questions after this talk, I very much welcome them. You can find me on WordPress Slack at @AnnZazu, or you can reach me at my site, nomad.blog. I will also try and drop my automatic email address separately. I just don't want to on a live presentation in case you want to follow up directly via email. I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on Facebook, and I'm on and off of Instagram, so please don't try to contact me those ways. Finally, I just want to say thanks so much for your time. Let's hear your questions at this point. I'm really excited to hear what you all are thinking and curious about. I do want to say I don't know everything, but I can find anything. And I've talked with David about how we can follow up after this presentation to get you all information and answers that you all want to questions that I might not be able to answer. So at this point, I'm going to pass it off to live and current Ann and give a high five from past Ann.